And therefore, we believe that there are a lot of wider audiences out there in addition to the people that we have. And some people left out compared to the morning. However, we believe that online there are more wider audiences, and also we can send you the copy of these videos. And the third presentation will be held in English language, and the third panel session is on the topic of digital opportunities and inclusive growth. I would like to now invite the panelists. First, Academic Co-Director, Pathways for Prosperity Commission, Professor of Economics at the Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford, Professor Stefan Derkun, and we have Marta Perez Cosa, Economic Affairs Officer, UNESCAP, and we have Kamal Bhattacharya again, representative of Pathways for Prosperity Commission CEO of Mojo Chatelese, Declan Maki, the Deputy Country Director, ADB. Also, we have a principal engineer at Mobile Phone Department, Samsung Electronics, Mrs. Yong Kyun Kim. And we have also CEO of Ulaanbaatar Development Corporation, Mr. Bilik Sahang. Also, John Bed, the CEO of Han Bank. Please come onto the stage. Now I would like to invite Mr. Bhatnaramdut to facilitate the third panel session. Okay, this third session is going to be held in English language. If you need a translation, then you can go and grab earsets from the corner near the door.
Okay. Apology. I had to put my mic on. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking your time and being with us today. So the topic of this panel discussion is around digital opportunities and inclusive growth. And so I would like to start the discussion with Declan. So if you guys wouldn't mind, I would like to address all of you with your first names. Is that okay? Okay, it's easier. Some of the last names are quite complicated. Okay, Declan, so you're the Deputy Country Director of Asian Development Bank. So Asian Development Bank is interested in supporting its client countries in their effort to capture the benefits presented by the rapid technological change and manage the transition into the digital economy. So what are the ADB's specific strategies for engaging Mongolia in its attempt to create a robust, inclusive digital economy?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me here on the panel today. It's a great privilege, and it's a super event. So I'm very, very happy to be here, and it's great to be here with such a strong panel. I just want to, before I jump in, I just want to apologize that I do have to leave a little bit early from this panel due to another appointment, another time constraint. So just apologies in advance. But back to your question. Look, I'd say there's, the first thing I'd say is ADB by its very definition is a client-focused organization. So our shareholders are all the countries that we work with. So Mongolia is a shareholder of the ADB. So ultimately, at the end of the day, my boss is the Minister of Finance here in Mongolia. So our job is to try and be as focused and supportive for our client countries, including Mongolia. So that drives everything. What does that mean in practice for digital technology? Well, what it means is that for the first time in one of our major strategic documents, digital technology and digital opportunities is a major part of our current strategy. So Strategy 2030, which came out last year, really focuses on using, I suppose, on two things. One, it's about using digital technology to improve what we do to support governments and the private sector to deliver better services and do better business. But it's also about thinking about the IT sector as a sector in itself that can be fostered to be a productive economic services sector within its own right. So what the ADB has done is we've set up a digital technology for development division, and we also have a digital group under our finance sector group. We have an advisory panel full of external experts, 8 external experts from across the Asia and Pacific region, but also a couple of global representatives to try and help push us in the right direction. And what we're seeing in practice is we're seeing an increased demand. So more and more ADB is doing a lot more digital technology operations and loans. So for example, we had 13 in 2016, 43 in 2017, and 59 in 2018. So you can see a steady increase and steady demand for our countries to do this. Interestingly, Mongolia is the country with the second largest number of digital technology projects.
In terms of?
In terms of numbers.
Okay,
in terms of numbers. So I think 19 overall. So we're working with the Mongolian government, for example, working with the taxation agency to develop their IT system so you can really improve the efficiency of how tax administration works. We're working with the Bank of Mongolia to work on their payment systems, providing IT services to them and that. We're working with the customs agency to upgrade their, how they use technology in their customs systems and upgrading those and providing training. We're working with the State Registry Authority to help them on the One Citizen, One Registration initiative. So recently we're working with them, for example, to make sure that registry services are available on an online platform across all the SUMs in Mongolia. So a huge amount of work going in there. I think we've got to we've covered so far about 150, but we're trying to keep on we're moving with the State Registration Organization. So there's a lot of stuff happening there. I think in terms of what I'd say about what ADB is doing is we're building up our own expertise, but we're also, one of the roles that ADB plays and tries to play is we're also a entry point to tap into expertise. We don't claim to know everything. We don't claim to be an expert in everything, but what we can do is we can work with our client countries, with Mongolia, not only to help them develop their own expertise, but also to tap into expertise wherever that is globally and bring in good examples of good practice in other contexts. Specifically for Mongolia, ADB is coming to the end of a 4-year country partnership strategy, which will end next year. And we will start the development of a new country partnership strategy, which we'll align it with the parliamentary cycle, so taking us up to 2024. And what I'd like to do there is I'd like to challenge ADB, but also our Mongolian counterparts. So we'll be engaging with the government, with private sector, with civil society, everyone to think about how we can support best. And I'd love to challenge that process to see how we can make sure that the financing and the expertise that ADB provides is as conducive to supporting Mongolia's objectives around digital technology. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So just to follow up on that, and what would you recommend, for the second phase, for the ADB's, as you mentioned, ADB's the next phase of country strategy. Sorry, the country strategy. What would you recommend for the government as well as ADB in order to include more input, how to develop more, how to progress in terms of digital economy for Mongolia? To further the progress.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So I would say, look, I'd say there's a couple of ways. There's plenty of different ways of sort of cutting and carving this up, but I would say there's a number of things, right? So first of all, there's a clear argument in Mongolia why it makes sense to think about service delivery and the efficiency of service delivery and what role digital technology can play in that. Mongolia is a country of 3.2 million people, but 1.5 million square kilometers. It's a very sparsely populated country. A lot of the population is focused in UB, more than 50%. But then there's a huge population, an important population spread out over the country. So obviously there are a lot of efficiencies that Mongolia should be looking for in terms of how it provides service delivery. And that's across the range. So the state registry work that I mentioned earlier is an example of that. So I'd say the government needs to continue looking at that frame, needs to continue thinking about where are the opportunities to improve service delivery and ensure that the government can deliver services efficiently across the country. But the other thing I'd also say is I'm always struck through our work, and particularly because we've got so many projects that are focused on digital technology here, I'm always impressed, and this is always the comment that comes from my colleagues when they're visiting from Manila, is they're very pleasantly surprised at the quality of IT firms and IT capacity in the country. And I think sometimes that's not always fully appreciated. And I suppose the question and the challenge that I would have there is, don't just think about digital technology in terms of its support to service delivery, which is hugely important, but think about it as a sector in of itself, a dynamic services sector. You know, you're talking about a small country sitting beside a giant economy, largest economy in the world, getting bigger. Thinking about the IT industry also as a services sector, and what then the role of government and institutions like ADB around that is. And I'd say quite quickly in that space, what you want to do is the government should obviously be supportive in creating the right enabling environment, but it's also the judgment as to when to get out of the way as well, so that you can let some of the dynamism that definitely exists here in the IT sector and let that kind of evolve and develop into what would be hopefully a very, very interesting economic sector for Mongolia going forward.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I would like to address to Marta. So Marta is Economic Affairs Officer at the UN SCAP. What is, in SCAP's assessment, is the greatest barrier to achieving inclusive growth in the digital economy, whether that would be in gender, income, or geographic lines?
In my experience and the work that we've been doing at ASCAP, there are two conditions to ensure that when promoting digital development, it's inclusive development. The first is to have that inclusiveness high on the political agenda. Technology innovation policies traditionally have been put in place to promote the competitiveness of a country and its economy. And considerations of inclusiveness were left aside and were thought to be the responsibility of social development policies or of educational policies. And I think now, in particular, as digital technologies are so pervasive across the economy and societies, it's even more important to ensure that you have inclusivity from the beginning, top of the agenda, as part of your discussions on your next digital strategy for your country. And the second element is to have a better grasp, a more balanced grasp on how you promote that digital inclusiveness. There are two extremes. Some people see technology as the bad element, the fears of job losses. And on the other streams, you have the techies that will see technology as the fixer and the solution to every single problem. And of course, we see that the solution, it's in the middle. It's in considering, and I think some of the panelists today have been talking about this, is how technologies is going to support you achieve your national development goals, your economic goals, or your educational goals, and use it as a tool, as an instrument for economic development or for social development. So in summary, inclusion should be an integral part of when designing high-level national strategies, and we should continuously learn on how to include that through participatory processes when discussing and involving different groups, so that you can ensure that the strategy will be consensual and will be able to stay for the long term. Also, in being very specific on what are some of the having specific goals in ensuring that technologies, that women will also be able to benefit fully from technologies, that those outside the bigger cities will also derive opportunities from technology. So having very specific goals in that area.
So as you know, Mongolia has very unique challenges when it comes to digital inclusiveness. You know, almost half of the population in the capital city, but at the same time, the remaining part is very much spread out in probably one of the most sparsely countries on earth. And given the unique challenges that we face, so because I'm asking this question because you work with governments in the Asia-Pacific region, so how should Mongolia approach when it comes to digital inclusiveness, especially reaching out those in disadvantage and those in reaching into the remote areas? So I was just reading that you did work with government of Cambodia, how to move forward technological and technology and innovation policies to have wider cover when it comes to digital inclusiveness.
Okay, that's $1 million question. And what our experience tells us is that you may need to work at different fronts.
Yeah.
And this is one of the fronts that Mongolia is working right now in the development of their national strategy and ensuring that it has an inclusive process to come to this strategy, but also inclusive outcomes. So clearly this is one good step for Mongolia to ensure it has an inclusive digital future. There are other ways in working with different elements of society to bring about that inclusive elements and components. We are exploring, and we've seen in other countries, that sometimes promoting inclusive innovation means enabling excluded communities to develop their skills and the capacities to innovate by themselves. So that could be one approach. There may be another approach, which is to encourage more inclusive businesses. So this will talk more about inclusive innovation. I think the digital future is not just about new technologies, but about new business models. So working with businesses in developing new models, new technology models that can reach out to low-income communities. For example, in Cambodia, the country where we've been working, at the national level, we've tried to insert specific goals encourage the government to think about specific goals that will target inclusiveness in their national strategy. But there also have been efforts in working in supporting businesses that go the extra mile and use technologies to facilitate financial access to low-income groups. There is, for example, a company that provides for free software to small entrepreneurs, and this has allowed informal businesses to have a record of their business transactions. And this allows entrepreneurs to manage their business better, but also gives them an opportunity to request a loan because now there are data about their businesses that banks can use to evaluate their credit worthiness. So in our experience in Cambodia and beyond, you need to work at different levels from the strategic point of view, including specific inclusive goals and objectives, but then working with other actors so that they also include their inclusive perspective.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of finance to access, we have got John, CEO of the largest bank in Mongolia. So I would like to ask about the access to finance. So the access to finance and wider financial inclusion remains some of the greatest pieces achieving widespread prosperity in the economy. So how Han Bank, one of the most popular banks in Mongolia, unarguably, thinking about the fourth industrial revolution and how the bank needs to change to meet the challenges for more seamless financial service delivery?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be up here and talking about the digital age. I think Han Bank, the scope of Han Bank today, I would say is already quite inclusive. And from a digital perspective, a lot of, and digital for me is more about providing a convenient service to a customer. I don't really have a sort of a digital strategy that is only for the sake of being digital we do things. There's a balance to how we approach it. And so, we look at what is best and what customers are asking for, and how best we can provide that service. And a lot of our services are through digital channels or through what we call remote access channels, whether it's ATMs or merchant POS machines. But quite a bit of our transactions go through what we call a USSD mobile banking SIM-based solution. And that's an older technology. It's not, it's not on your phone it's in a smartphone, but a vast majority of our customers outside of UB across the countryside use this already, whether it's farmers, herders, small SMEs, larger SMEs. We already provide a lot of service to them through that mobile technology. So from an inclusion perspective, we're, I think, quite there. I think where we need to get better is more on how to make that service more convenient, how to make that service more user-friendly, whether it's through user interface or how customers sign up for that service. But I think, from an inclusive part on the digital, I think that it's more about education, and because we have a lot of situations. Here's an example of, understanding the risks involved in digital technology for banks and for customers of banks. You'll have people who are buying and selling cell phones, smartphones, and they forget to wipe the data from their phones, and all of a sudden you're accessing somebody else's account, and that's for us is a fairly large initiative across the bank in helping our customers understand the risks involved in digital technology, because that's very present. In terms of financing, if that's what we are, of course, the biggest retail community bank here in Mongolia, and we have programs through our branches to finance small businesses, herders, farmers. That's all there. I mean, we also, it's when you think about inclusion. A couple of years ago, when I asked how many new customers we acquire every month, the number was around 4,000 or 5,000. So every month we bring in five, and half of those are infants who are newborns and get enrolling into the children's subsidy program. And so that's, we start very young there, and it's a very good sign. But I mean, from an inclusion perspective, what we could do more to is more on the education front. To, we have 435 some locations across outside of UB. A couple of thousand employees who work with customers across the country, and what we could do better is help the education, whether it's helping customers understand the risks involved in digital technology, but also in how to use it better for their own benefits, but also household budgeting is important.
Right.
And that's something that we work with MBA and the Bank of Mongolia on. And because of our proximity to the customer, we're right out in front on that program, and it will remain a very important part of our customer engagement strategy.
Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, I think Combank app is the second most downloaded app in Mongolia. I think it's definitely in top 5.
I think we might be number 1. I'm not
number
sure. No, I don't know that data off the top of my head, but for me it's really about customer convenience, and that's a big part. The customer centricity of it. I'm not very interested in doing digital for the sake of doing digital. I want to make sure that there's a clear benefit for customers, and we're providing a convenient, understandable service, safe service for our customers, and not just do it for the sake of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I would like to shift question to AK from South Korea. Thank you for being with us today here.
Thank you.
So you're a principal engineer at Samsung Electronics.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I guess, the Mongolian customers, Samsung is the most popular phone in Mongolia, probably much in the Asia-Pacific region. Probably it means it has the most affordable and it's the most affordable and inclusive phone. How Samsung achieved this? How does it differentiate itself from other competitors?
Thank you for using Samsung phones very much. Samsung targets the global market and tried to meet the requirements of each tier. Also in Mongolia, we've worked to meet the requirements from local operators. Therefore, we have a lot of lineups, and when I go to abroad, I can see the Samsung phones which I haven't seen before. Yeah. We have many overseas R&D labs in over 10 countries, and some of them developed the specific applications for local operators and provide demonstration and get feedback quickly. And the other side, Samsung has some special program. It calls overseas regional expert. Samsung sends employees to other countries for 1 year. They don't work there. Their job is traveling in the country, and they experience people and culture and report it to company. And Samsung learns from their experience. In this way, Samsung makes efforts to know people and understand what they need. I think that is why Mongolian people love Samsung phone.
Thank you. So you're from South Korea, probably one of the most digitally savvy economies in the world. And then also you have more than 20 years of experience of engineering software engineering in South Korea.
Yeah.
From your perspective, how's digital divide in South Korea? And how technology helps eliminate or decrease digital divide?
Yeah, according to a U.S. survey in 2016, and Korea has the smallest digital divide among 40 major countries. Okay, and my father is 80 years old, and he buys books from Amazon website. And my mother is 76 years old, and she learns cook a new recipe through YouTube with her smartphone. And in fact, I don't feel digital divide in Korea much. Yeah. And these days, almost every people use internet service and smartphones, regardless of differences in age and education attainments and income levels. I think Korea is sensitive to IT technology, and they are making many efforts to adopt latest technology. And therefore, our IT infrastructure is developed a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this is where countries like emerging economies like Mongolia would like to achieve. So, Stephen, I would like to direct the next question to you. You're the head of the commission. So as you know, Mongolia has, as I earlier mentioned, a very unique challenge when it comes to digital inclusiveness. You know, some areas being very sparsely populated, and how to reach those people and those living in remote areas, but still with their cell phones, or those in disadvantages, right? So the Commission, under your leadership, highlights the importance of not only ensuring economic growth, but also prioritizing inclusiveness. So how, in your opinion, this country should specifically consider promoting inclusiveness and equality, given the circumstances?
Well, as you have alluded to, you know, this is not an equal society.
Right.
Most societies in the world are not, and you have your unique versions and forms of disparities, and they include geographical disparities as well. Certain, you know, the GERD districts that also are very different from other parts of urban areas, and so on. I mean, the first thing we should just not assume is that digital technology is somehow a magic formula, the magic to actually suddenly solve all these things easily. But one of the things, though, is that it gives you another chance, a new chance to actually focus on inclusive versions of development. Definitely geographically, digital technologies provide an opportunity of things, you know, that are apart from distance to bring them together. But I would say, you know, you do need a very specific focus on being inclusive, because otherwise you just get inequalities just being reproduced now again in the digital space as well. So, you know, as a commission, we first and foremost want to emphasize you just need to take this into account from the start. And then what can you do? Well, in practice, well, one thing we definitely argued for is that for things that the public sector were to do, well, make sure that by design there is a big focus on inclusivity. So you will do certain things with the explicit attempt to make sure people are included, and not just for everything you do, just try it out with better off populations and then maybe one day we'll adopt it for the others. No, just resolutely do this. Also, when focusing on private sector, you know, you should, you know, almost you can create sets of incentives and opportunities, specifically so that they are inclusive. You know, we can't assume that private sector will necessarily treat poorer groups as their obvious target market, but what about creating an enable environment that actually provides extra incentives in taxation, in regulation, in the way licenses are allocated that actually favor poorer groups. I mean, there's again no magic formula, but build it into the model of governance, of regulation in your economy, you will actually be able to steer, at least to some extent, towards inclusivity. But I will finally say is that one of the things we definitely noticed across the world, and here we pick it up as well, is that, you know, it is not just a matter of providing coverage or even providing phones or providing getting people on it. There are often within society norms and practices that just exclude certain groups, often women, from actually using the technology in the same sort of way as it is. So education and, you know, social awareness and using social media to create awareness around to make sure that everybody gets equal opportunity to use these technologies is also important.
It's also because technological change seems much faster than everybody assumes. But if we don't do anything about, for example, digital inclusiveness, then at the same time, the gap between, for example, those who have enough resources to buy better phone, have access to better technology, is really, you know, widening compared to those who actually do not have much resources to play with.
Why don't you have
much resources to play with?
Yes. No. So, and that is exactly the point that we're really concerned with. Sometimes it is presented as if this is this fundamentally democratic technology that is easily accessible for for everybody in the same way. For a poor person, even your cheapest Samsung phone is actually still quite expensive. Data are not too expensive here, but they're not cheap, and all these things will lock people into certain models. And it's definitely something we found across the world, is that we really worry that business as usual will just result in the inequalities of the analog world translated or maybe even exacerbated in the digital world. Right. And you know, once they start emerging, we've seen it with many processes of new technologies and change in society that creates all kinds of tensions. So you start better addressing them early.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask the next question from Billik Sachen. I've got more questions reserved at last. The best ones at last. So when it comes to Mongolia, so what are the next steps for Mongolia toward the digital development, specifically around startups and investments?
Well, I'm not sure about digital economy, but I have as a part of the team members who has initiated the first hub, innovation hub, government-running innovation hub, and we started it in 2017 as an initial idea that incubating startups and fostering them and investing in them and bringing in some unicorn and newbie. But however, we thought that the first, it's about a matter of the hard infrastructures or the tables, that the environment is supposed to be there. That was our initial idea. And of course, we were aware of the whole soft content, but never thought it was so important that much. And then we started building the whole thing, established in about a little more than a year ago. And then we started running it. And it was the hard infrastructure was actually nothing, and building innovation ecosystem and investments that we are lacking to build the whole startup innovation ecosystem. So first, we have to think about the programs, accelerator programs, and investment VCs, investment schemes and cultures and communities. That was the most important part
Creating an ecosystem.
of the startup ecosystem. So, however, it's a learning process, right? And we started about a year ago, and at the time, it was like 4 or 5 of the co-working spaces, same incubation innovation hub was run by the private investors. And so the next step for government, or I'm representing here the UB city. So for us, it was the first good step. I mean, it was really good first step, and we have now running about 15 startup companies at our innovation center, and some of them is, I wouldn't say graduated, but they have somewhat successful out of the incubation office, and they are regular companies in regular offices, not in the co-working spaces anymore. So for us, inclusiveness was very important. So the next step for the UB city for developing innovation hub in the Gary area was the next projects, and one of them is already has been implemented, and it's ready to run by the management team of the hub. And we are thinking about more innovation hub, kind of the environment in Gary areas to make sure the inclusiveness of the whole innovations and the youths for the digital economy and also the innovation startup ecosystems. So that's actually what I would say. And also there's one thing that I have to mention is that VCs, the most important part of what I understood so far, but after I've been talking to you, probably it's not a commercial, it's more like the social parts would be playing in the big roles in the startup. So, for now, what I thought is VCs and angel fundings and the investing structures, schemes that we need to implement to foster, promote startup companies here. So that's one of the really important parts of stakeholder of the ecosystem, startup ecosystems. So government should be pursuing more on regulating those investment schemes or as a tax exam or anything that promotes. So on the regulation side, that's what I think. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So in Mongolia we have got fledgling but growing, startup community. And the next question is Kamal, for you. So you have a lot of experience working at the frontier of technological development through your roles at IBM Research in Africa and iHub, which is Kenya's most important innovation hub. And then also on the side note, I would like to comment on the Ulaanbaatar's innovation hub as well. And Safaricom, which is the innovation lab at the largest telecom company in Kenya. And now you're at your own edtech company. What role do you think countries such as Mongolia have in global innovation ecosystem? Especially considering technology creation is largely driven by China and the West.
I mean, I think maybe you need to rephrase the question a little. Sure. It's the same what we were discussing today over lunch. It's like we have this whole idea about unicorns and about many different things that we expect in terms of what our countries should provide in the context of the global economy, based on what China is doing, based on what the United States is doing. But for all practical purposes, that's not the reality of the world, right? The reality of the world is the guy who is buying stuff and selling stuff here, right? Is the shop owner, is the small company that manufactures something, right? They're all providing jobs, they're providing employment, they're providing income for themselves.
Solving problems.
They're solving local problems, they're sending their kids to school, right? You know, nobody grows up to build a unicorn. A unicorn is a mythical figure. Right? It's a completely nonsensical approach to thinking about business, right? And in the same way is that, you know, can anyone today in some technology areas compete with China? The answer is no. China has a human capital in some very specific areas of technology that even outpaces the United States, right? So my take is that why compete with something that's not worth competing with, right? Instead, I think, you know, I think it's important to go back to the basics, right? Which is, you know, what are we asking our entrepreneurs to do, right? How do we enable them to solve, you know, important local problems that are also commercially important, right? You know, I'm not a huge fan of, you know, I kind of feel like a lot of things that we do in the social entrepreneurship space should be more in government welfare than in actual commercial businesses, right? And so in Mongolia and, you know, in places like Mongolia, I think, look, you have all the things going for you. You actually have two big markets in front of your house, right? Which is Russia and China. You have a young population. You have a good education system. You have a growing economy, right? You have a banking CEO that said something which I think was the most profound thing I've heard in a long time, which is, I don't have a digital strategy. By the way, I'm serious. I worked in financial inclusion for the last 10 years, right? And everyone came and says, you know, my last job at Safaricom was about, you know, help us with our digital strategy. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this, you know? And he said it right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about how do you serve a particular customer to solve a problem for them, right? And whether you need a phone to do that, or whether you need a smartphone to do that, or whether you need to set up a shop somewhere to do that, it doesn't matter. They have different cost of acquisitions, and your job as a business is to drive that cost of acquisition down to the point where you can optimally make profits out of it, right? I think Mongolia has all of these things, and now you have innovation hubs and all that, right? You know, I think what's important, and to this point I just want to add, is it is important to build an investment structure that makes sense for the country.
For the country.
Yeah, because you need money, right? You always need investments. You won't get the Silicon Valley investors because the Silicon Valley investors need the unicorn to be commercially viable. But, you know, in Kenya, a lot of investors have invested in profitably so without needing a company to be a unicorn, right? So I think, you know, building that infrastructure, building the right regulatory framework to support investments into the company, that's absolutely critical, right? And I think I would start from that perspective, you know, rather than, you know, hoping to compete with, you know, very advanced economies.
And I noticed that a lot of, for example, Mongolian startups, you know, they aim to use Mongolian market sort of like prototyping a new idea or testing new ideas or trying new products and services, and with a goal going, you know, regional, going actually to other countries to implement and getting bigger. And I think that's when they see that they can actually raise significant amount of money. Because Mongolia, you know, by default, it's a small country with 3 million people. And of that 3 million people, actually, how many people are financially capable of actually being a, you know, potential customer? So there are very unique sort of, you know, advantages or disadvantages for this country.
So I'll answer with an anecdote. You know, the former CEO of Safaricom, Bob Collymore, who recently passed away, incredibly inspirational guy. And, you know, he told me something really interesting, which I also take to heart in my own business, which is, you know, you should never ignore the market in front of your house. you should always focus on that because you don't actually know how valuable that market is. Now, I'll give you a simple thing, right? So M-Pesa, which is the mobile money system in Kenya, has about 70% market share. 70%. Every single household in Kenya, which is a country of, I guess, about 50 million people, so every single household in Kenya has access to that one particular service, right, which allows to send money from your phone to another person's phone. So there was a delegation when I was with Safaricom. There was a delegation, including Jack Ma, who came to Kenya, and you know what he said? He said something really interesting, which was, you know, I mean, we have Alipay and we have all of these things, but you guys have the entire market. You guys managed to reach every single household. We are nowhere close. Now compare the numbers. The numbers are, Safaricom, you know, there are 20 million people who are using M-Pesa. You know, Ant Financials, there are 400 million people who are using their tools, right? So just in the sheer numbers, it's very different. But in one case, you've reached every single household. And the other one, you're nowhere close to that, right? So now I would challenge a startup here that says, okay, you know, you have 3 million people here, half of them live here, reach 80% of them. If you reach 80%, you know, of a particular part of the population, then you have a case, and then people will look at it and say, oh, wait a second, you know, I mean, okay, it works here in the center of the city, it has done something really well, it's commercially viable. I know another country where you could do this. Then you will see that people will come and pick it up. So you should always never ignore the market in front of your house.
So the next question, you know, is Bilixar talked about innovation hub. So you were leading the iHub, which is Kenya's most important iHub. And so innovation hubs, are they sort of requirement for a startup community to thrive? I mean, what are the benefits?
No, they're not a requirement. The way how I would think of this is that when you are in mature countries, then, you know, especially in the US, you don't need innovation hubs really. I mean, because it's sort of, you know, it's much more embedded in the culture. And entrepreneurship or tech entrepreneurship is much more embedded in the culture. There are much more resources available. In countries that are just building startup ecosystems, you need to create a nexus between the actual people and the opportunities. You need to find a way to bring this together. You need to find a way to bring this together, which means you need to get the people who are really excited to create something. You need to give them a place. You need to help them find their peers. You need to bring opportunities together into one place, because you will reach a critical mass at some point. In Kenya, the whole scene started with blogging. The iHub was a place where bloggers would get together, because that was the thing in those days, right? And then all of a sudden, Kenya had the internet because somebody put broadband into Kenya.
Was it government supported or is it purely private?
No, I mean, initially the government was instrumental to set up the iHub.
Okay, and later?
They supported it. Later on, it was supported by, by development organizations, right? I don't know, it was I think the Ford Foundation, the Media Foundation, some others invested into it. But then, my job for that year was to actually put it on commercial footing, right? So right now, it basically offers services both to the people who sit there, but it also has different arms that help people to understand what's going on in the opportunity space, research companies and all that. So it has become sort of commercially viable over the years, but it took a long time, right? But initially it was really, and by the way, it's probably something that I would suggest here in Mongolia as well. Reach out to some of the development organizations, because there is a lot of appetite in development organizations to support local entrepreneurship, right? They're of course not the VCs, but usually They are the same VCs.
At least for a setup and getting started.
Yeah, for getting started to get attention. You know, quite frankly, I think what worked really well in Kenya is that there were a few individuals who just went out into the world and said, you know, we're innovating in Kenya. Whether it was true or not didn't matter, right? But they just went out, they made a case for Kenya. And I think one of the problems maybe with Mongolia is that, you know, I haven't met anyone anywhere in the world where I typically hang out who's making the case for Mongolia, right? Who's out there and saying, hey, you know what, there is something happening here, and it's really important. We're in a politically important situation. We're an interesting country. There are interesting problems to be solved. You know, come by, check us out.
Okay.
We need a marketing strategy, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And just for the second part of the discussion, just I guess, you know, just you think, since I'm a moderator, so Mongolia is currently in drafting the national long-term strategy or the development plan. So with a basically long-term vision up to 25 years, with a very comprehensive next 5-year plan. And then obviously when we look at the future, next 25 years, obviously we have to consider digital economy. And then especially for a young country like Mongolia. And then I just wanted to take this opportunity and ask panel, what, since the policy in the currently in the process, and what would you recommend as an expert for Mongolia to consider? Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Well, so 25 horizon is a very long horizon. It's worthwhile thinking and dreaming about it.
For a vision. Yeah.
But for the digital economy side, I mean, what will happen in the next 5 years will probably shape very much how it's all going to go. So, you know, have a clear vision, but also have a very clear sense of what the key priorities you want to support in the next kind of 5 years. I would say it's really important. Moreover, from what I've seen in other countries, these kind of exercises can just be something that occasionally, when it suits him or her, a politician may refer to, or it becomes something that has a few key priorities there is actually broad consensus around to actually pursue. Without the latter, not much will ever happen, because then it will get lost in the electoral cycle, it will get lost in the personality culture of politics, and you want to avoid that. So I would say, you know, make sure you have a long-term vision, but a clear set of a number of priorities in a relatively a decent amount of time, 5 years or so, or definitely something not that coincides with an electoral cycle, maybe 6 years or whatever you take, but then having priorities that can be shared priorities quite broadly. And then these are useful processes. I think one of the big weaknesses of the current age across the world has been the last decade or so is that there is very little sense of a longer term, of action for the longer term. Whether we talk about climate, whether we talk about digital economy, there is actually a whole series of things where a longer horizon is needed, but politics horizons have shrunk to much, much shorter. And having, you're not going to overcome that, but having a clear sense of a number of priorities and definitely a kind of a shared narrative, a shared vision of where you want to go is reasonable.
Martha, would you like to add?
I can only re-emphasize that I think prioritizing, it's a very difficult exercise, but if you manage to prioritize your focus as a country for the next 5 years, you will see the difference, and you will raise credibility, confidence, to allow you to continue on that exercise. Perhaps only to add is focus on the opportunities that are hanging low, and that could be achieved as a demonstration effort. And I think some of the goals may be a bit more invisible in terms of changing mindsets around entrepreneurial approaches, learning for life, government learning from their actions and adapting on a faster pace. And in the current context, I think those mindsets are even more important when the pace of change it's incredibly high.
Because Mongolia, it's, just to give some facts, it's very much heavily based on natural resources, compromising more than 90% of the exports are just three types of resource products, natural resource products. And just looking into the future, having a vision, and I mean, in order to diversify the economy, and I think technology inevitably has to play an important role for this country moving forward.
Can I?
Go ahead, please.
This is, I think this is a really important point. You know, it's a country, as you say, living so much from natural resources, including coal, which is a resource of the past and will not be a resource of the future. And it will be an important, it may be a resource of the present, but it will not be one of the future. So thinking carefully through this, I think, starting from something what Kamal mentioned, technology will play a big role because it also will bring a really clear focus also on value addition in services, in the services sector. And it's when Kamal says, you know, look first at your doorstep, getting your urban economy to function and being more productive, getting that to be much better forward-looking and very dynamic. And then you are on the doorstep of some of the fastest growing parts of the global economy to actually, you know, learn to do it at home and then sell it overseas. And with digital technologies, you can do that. You do not need to have a port, or you need not to live too near to the sea, or you don't need to have an enormous Belt and Road to move it on. Absolutely. You can do it on a digital Belt and Road that will look very differently, and that you can just build yourself and take advantage of. But start at home, get your urban economy to function better, get your rural and urban interactions going, and begin really this kind of reintegration of your own economy, moving away from natural resources.
So John, representing private sector, would you like to add?
Usually, you know, when we talk about diversifying the economy, it's going to take time and commitment. Right? It's not going to be. It's not an overnight situation. I think some of the areas that we like to look at is tourism. I think is also an opportunity here. I know that I don't know if that's very digital, but it's because some of the landscape in the west and parts of this country are just absolutely breathtaking. I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go see some of the branch employees in Oofs and Hoofdijmag, and some of these are just wonderful places that are not, I think, are not really tourist ready, and so I think there's an opportunity there to build that sector.
Thank you. So, Belisa, maybe if you'd like to add, especially representing Ulaanbaatar, where, I mean, half of the population live, just when we define the vision for this country in the next 25 years, and how, digital economy should play a role.
Well, Ulaanbaatar city is the fiber optic is the new transportation logistic way to go out to the third world country. That would be the mission for us. That's what I think. I mean, we are a landlocked country, and railway and road, aviation, pipe, it's all the traditional logistics. It's not a, it's somehow, it's still the logistics is still the development, but we have to focus on how we would go out in the world would be a fiber optic. So let's go through the fiber optic. It's a digital economy. It's a knowledge. It's apps. It's something that we could transfer through the fiber optic. So it would be the Mongolian future. That's what I believe. And plus, Mongolian people is something culture. We herders and we nomads, and we make a decisions on our own. We don't play as a team. We just like to do it our own. You know, if you ask from the audience here, but probably about 99% would say, and someday I want to start my own business. Someday I want to be the entrepreneur. So it's Mongolian, I mean, the cultural difference. So I think it's not, at some point it's a disadvantage, but at some point I don't think it's a disadvantage. It's for the good opportunity for us to go entrepreneur nation, just like Israel, the startup nation. So on that part, everybody's talked about the high math skills and high IQs and everything. In previous panel discussions, probably they covered most of the things that I wanted to talk. But here's I want to add that maybe that's the advantage. That's the advantage for us, high math skills and technology. And fiber optics, the unique technology has given us the opportunity to go to the world without blocked by the two neighbors and just go through the third world, the Western countries or where the market is. So in Mongolia, we are more, in UB City, we are more focusing on a technology-based. There's a lot of problems in the city, so we are looking at the solutions we could use, the technologies. And Ulaanbaatar Development Corporation is one of the state-owned, municipality-owned shareholding company. And we are established to become a bridge between private sectors and public sectors to solve the problems in the public and the city problems with the private investors if there is a business case. And a lot of things that we are facing right now in UB City, a lot of problems could be solved through the private investors and the technology. So that's one of the reasons that we are passed on 4 projects, for example, last week about the payment systems and smart parking management and cab systems and call centers and all that. Everything is technology-based projects to solve some of the problems that we're facing right now. So I think that's our trend or UBCT approach for the next 4 or 5 years. Yes.
Thank you. AK, would you like to add?
I'd like to answer for my last question because I didn't answer for last question because I was nervous.
Nice.
Do you mind?
So,
yeah, the question was how technology helped to reduce digital divide.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's about Samsung, and Samsung make very various efforts to make up the unprivileged, and we also have developed 2 features which consider the elderly who are unfamiliar to digital and the disabled who are uncomfortable using digital devices. And for example, my parents didn't want to have smartphone, but I gave it to them for gift. And for the first time, they were embarrassed. They didn't know how to use it, and they thought it's very complicated. But I changed the UI mode to simple UI. It provides the larger text and simple UI menu. So it helps for them to use it easily. Right now, they are enjoying the digital life. They meet the childhood friends with chatting application with their smartphone. As a conclusion, I'd like to share something. Let me read it. Yeah. Yes. Samsung has an accessibility design principle with 4 C words. One is consideration. It means become a user and carefully consider. 2, comprehensiveness. It means pursue design without discrimination for everyone. 3, coherence. It means provides equal accessibility without product distinction. Last one is co-creation. It means make together. I believe if technology is accomplished with like this philosophy, it helps to reduce digital divide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Samsung is probably one of the multinationals that contributed a lot for connecting people around the world. So Kamal, so the last question for you. So having extensive experience in Africa, in Kenya, and probably there are similarities as emerging markets. And when it comes to startup ecosystem and community, I'm sure Kenya is far ahead. And what would you recommend, especially when we are trying to look at, determine the vision for this country in the long term, and then looking at the next, 5 years, what to do?
I think there may be 3 points. The first one is which you could do better than a lot of African countries have done, is you could have an actual policy strategy for entrepreneurship. In terms of what it will do for taxation, what it can do for support systems, etc. I mean, where is the government going to be involved in supporting entrepreneurship, maybe even with the focus on particular segments of entrepreneurship. So, one of the challenges that I've seen in Kenya is that the strategy went so deep that it covered pretty much every shop owner to every technology opportunity. So it meant, everything to everyone and nothing to anyone. A focused entrepreneurship strategy, I think, is the first thing. The second thing is build more entrepreneurship hubs. Build more places and call them entrepreneurship hubs, call them something, build more of them. People will come eventually and make use of them, right? Build more places where people can come together. And the third thing I think is to just try it, right? I mean, just to try out things, right? So, I'm not saying you won't be a leader in blockchain applications. Chances are you won't, but then again, you don't know if you don't actually try it, right? So it's almost like maybe the savior of blockchain, which in my mind is a completely dead and stupid technology, is here in Mongolia, and we'll figure it out how to actually make something useful out of the blockchain, right? So I think, and this is why, coming back to my first point, you have to build that. You have to create a critical mass. You have to create enough buzz around it and enough people that you see that there are certain things that are emerging. And that's, I think, the government has a significant role to play, a very hands-on role to play in that. And then, of course, the private sector has this, John was talking about all the things that Khan Bank does, right? Maybe Khan Bank should be also looking into incubating fintech. Maybe they're already doing it, right? I don't know. I mean, but in a lot of countries, this has actually worked quite well, especially in mature economies. Not so much in emerging economies, where oftentimes startups are perceived as a risk, not necessarily as an opportunity. There are different models. Experiment with it. In the next 5 years, you'll see what the right path is to follow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the panels. I think our time is up. And thank you for taking your time and being with us today. Thank you.